Alright YouTube, it's time for me to hyperfixate more on Starfox. No funny skit, no long intro this time, we're jumping straight in. Today we're going to be talking about theories and speculation about Krystal from Starfox Adventures, or in particular, we're going to be talking about Krystal Staff, which I argue is one of the coolest video game weapons to date, honestly. It's got a bit of everything. It can whack, it can shoot, it can freeze, it can beat up T-Rexes, and it can make you impervious to basically every kind of damage. And I just think that's neat. We're gonna be talking about the dino language and speculating a bit on Krystal's homeworld of Cerinia as well. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a while now, so I'm really excited to dive into these theories that I have. Given the nature of this video, we will have to speculate and assume some things, so just a heads up for that. I'll try to indicate when we're speculating so it's obvious, and I'll be sure to note down my sources similar to the last theory video that we did. The best starting point to talk about all of this is honestly Krystal Staff. There's a lot about this weapon that is set at the very beginning of the game in a single cutscene and then simply never addressed again in the entire game. But the lore implications are pretty wild, all things considered. Like I mentioned in the small intro earlier, Krystal is first seen with a magic staff that is quickly dropped and recovered by Fox a little bit later in the story. It only makes an appearance in Star Fox Adventures and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and presumably gets benched for a blaster by the time that Star Fox Assault rolls around, which honestly feels like a hefty downgrade to me, but whatever. The staff is an incredibly helpful tool, but it's shrouded in mystery, and you'll soon see why. When Fox discovers the staff in Thorntail Hollow, he receives a message from Krystal. Presumably, the message was recorded and stored in the staff magically. There is a lot in this scene, and the scene that follows after beating the first round of Sharpclaw in Thorntail Hollow. I do feel like the major points of the staff's lore are often overlooked. Here's what Krystal says about the staff in her message. 1. It has the ability to feel when someone is ready to wield it. 2. It can guide and show the wielder how to progress, if the wielder is willing. 3. Its main focus is combat, but it can also be used as a tool. After the last recorded message, a door near the well moves, revealing the first magic cave location. Keep in mind the architecture of this door, the area where the Queen Earthwalker is, and just the general Thorntail Hollow aesthetic. I'll be coming back to this later. First, we gotta talk about magic caves. Magic caves are upgrade points for the staff, and they're scattered all across Dinosaur Planet. Once Fox finds one, he can enter and receive a new ability by lifting the staff where it's empowered with some sort of magic lightning? This is logical in a gameplay sense. The player is able to unlock abilities that permit progression to new areas. When it comes to lore, however, it starts to make things confusing because the staff is implied to not even be from Dinosaur Planet itself. Here's my reasoning for that. The similar aesthetic of the staff to Krystal's attire implies that wherever she got the attire is probably where she got the staff. Given that she seems fairly ignorant of Dinosaur Planet, we can assume that she's only recently arrived. Looking at her attire, there isn't much that directly correlates between it and anything we really see on Dinosaur Planet, so I'm gonna operate under the assumption that Krystal's attire is from her fallen planet of Cerinia. You could argue she picked up the clothing and staff after fleeing her doomed homeworld, but there's really not much supporting evidence of that happening. So if the staff is not from Dinosaur Planet, what are these magic caves that seem to be constructed to power up Krystal's staff? Why can the staff be used to open doors all around the planet? Why are there little power spots for the staff to use its magic on a planet that the staff didn't even originate from? I see a lot of people asking these questions or just kind of writing this off as gameplay mechanics. While I'm not gonna tell you that I have all the answers, I'm gonna explain something heavily implied through the lore, specifically the lore that Krystal gives us. Please keep in mind that while this is implied in the lore, it is not necessarily confirmed in the lore, so this is a bit of speculation. Given what we know in the game, I believe the way the staff works is that its sense of ability progression is actually tied to the user, not the staff itself. When it's knocked from Krystal's hands, I believe she was trying to raise it to strike the galleon during the storm, but unfortunately, it fell before she could fire off a shot. I can't think of any other reason why she would try to lift it like that if not to fire at the galleon. She does later use the fire blaster at the Krazoa god's head towards the end of the game, so it does seem like she's aware that the ability at least exists. She does kind of softly confirm that in her dialogue again when Fox picks up the staff. Speaking of Krystal's dialogue, let's re-examine it. She claims the staff can feel when someone is ready to wield it, that the staff can call to its owner if they learn to see and hear its call, and that the staff can offer guidance. While she says this, a large door opens across Thorntail Hollow. It goes without saying that there's some sort of connection between the staff's acceptance of Fox and the door, which I guess this means that this is also something the staff can just do? Put a pin in that thought and save it for later as well. We're gonna go back to that. After looking over Krystal's dialogue and observing the way the staff is treated in the game, my personal interpretation of the lore is that a lot of the staff gameplay mechanics we see in game are not physically there. They are signals from the staff to Fox to use certain abilities. In particular, I'm referring to things like fire blaster switches and rocket boost pads, things that seem conveniently placed for the staff. If that statement is confusing, let me put it this way. The fire blaster icon doesn't appear because there is one naturally there. It appears because the staff is willing it to exist. It's showing us where to shoot in order to progress because it is a sentient staff and it can feel the magic in the area. That's why the icon appears after you get the staff. It is showing you it is there, it is allowing you to see it. I believe this is what Krystal is referring to in her dialogue, although without firm confirmation, we do have to continue to label this as speculation. This explains some things about the staff, but not all. Consider again the magic caves, which are still pretty mysterious if we operate under the idea that the staff is not native to Dinosaur Planet. In order to talk about my theory about the magic caves, though, we have to talk about something else. And that is the dino language. One of the most prominent things about Star Fox Adventures is that it features another language, which is called Dino in the game. Krystal arrives already able to speak the language, and Fox shows up and has to rely on a translator the entire time he's there. The language is not really a true language so much as a cipher, but details. Proper nouns are notably not translated by the cipher, so Prince Tricky is still named Prince Tricky. The emphasis on Fox not knowing the Dino language but Krystal understanding it has a lot of implications. I think that a lot of people are quick to assume that Krystal understands the language via telepathy, but I feel as though that would permit her to comprehend intention, not necessarily speak another language. So when the Cloud Runner at the start is telling her about Krazoa Palace, she would be able to understand him. She would not be able to reply in Dino if this was just telepathy. But in the game, she talks fluently. So we can assume that she knows how to speak Dino despite being new to the planet, which we've already discussed why that probably is. So how is this possible? My theory is the Dino language is not exclusively a language on Dinosaur Planet. Dino may not even be its proper name. I think it's a language that the dinosaurs adopted, but I think it's far more widespread than being only on Dinosaur Planet. I think it's likely that it's also the language of Cerinia. That would explain how Krystal is fluent in it. There's some evidence that leans into the idea of Cerinia and Dinosaur Planet being somewhat close into proximity, but to talk about that, we're gonna have to talk about Cerinia and we're gonna have to talk about Andros. Bear with me because we're about to kind of dive in deep with some stuff. We don't know much about Cerinia other than its name. There's been a lot of speculation as to what Cerinia was like before it was destroyed. I think we can glean the following from analyzing Krystal though. Magic was probably common in society, or at least it was common on that planet. It was at least possible for some Cerinians to have certain powers, such as telepathy. They had some interplanetary method of travel. It was destroyed in some way, although the method of destruction is technically unknown. Dinosaur Planet is said to be in a far-off corner of the Lilat system. That doesn't necessarily mean it's alone out there. The Cerinians were also seemingly capable of traveling between planets, I don't see how Krystal would know how to pilot a ship or even have been able to flee Cerinia if that were not the case. You've probably noted that I have yet to mention the beta version of Star Fox Adventures, which was just called Dinosaur Planet. There's a good reason for this. While I think some of it could help explain some of these mysteries, we don't know what's canon and what's not. One thing I do want to pull from the Dinosaur Planet version of the story, however, is that Krystal does initially end up on the planet via teleporter. While I don't think the teleporter is canon any longer, I bring it up because it's not impossible she traveled here in a similar way. But personally, given that she pilots a ship at the end of Adventures, I'm more likely to think she flew to Dinosaur Planet literally in a ship rather than get teleported. It just makes a bit more sense. You can actually see she is piloting at the end of the game the same ship that the Sharpclaw use at the start of the game when they are transporting Prince Tricky to Ice Mountain. Is that her ship? Was that always their ship? I actually don't know. I don't know, but she can pilot it because she does it at the end of the game. When Krystal is captured, she cries out, "It's you!" to the person who pushed her into the trap. We later learn that person is Andros. The natural conclusion people can come up with is that Andros and Krystal have met before, and given that Andros is kind of a terrible person, he may have been the cause of her planet's destruction. Andros is also undead at this point, and is sort of a floating spirit haunting Krystal, trying to revive himself. He baits her out to use her in his resurrection ritual. We don't really know how Andros has been floating around to various planets as a ghost, but we can assume he's capable to just kind of do that. Because he's dead, he doesn't need to breathe, and, you know, I guess that means he can just fly across space. That seems to be what he's doing in the game. But looking at Krystal's backstory, she obviously escapes her planet's destruction, theoretically the destruction that was at the hands of Andros. She flies off, starts looking for answers, and receives a distress signal that has her journey to Dinosaur Planet. You'd think that in itself implies it's nearby, right? Or at least somewhat, especially if she's still wearing her Cerinian drip. I think that's what the kids call it these days, the drip. Andros would not have had to fly as far as well if Dinosaur Planet was nearby, which tracks with how he's already there when she arrives. I've gone off on a big tangent, so back to the point. And that's that I believe the Cerinians have been to Dinosaur Planet before numerous times. This may also explain another reason Krystal came to Dinosaur Planet after Cerinia perished. She knew it was a place that her people had been to before, and she knew she would be relatively safe there, in theory, despite the man-eating dinosaurs. Generally, when we look at mysteries on Dinosaur Planet, we wave our hands and say, the Krazoa probably did it. I do think that excuse works a lot, but I find it doesn't work that well with magic caves. Why would the Krazoa need to build those? Did the Krazoa even build those? I'm starting to think they didn't. So hear me out. Every time the Krazoa built something, they slapped their face all over it. We don't see that kind of stuff in the magic caves. The only consistency we have with the magic caves and Krazoan architecture is that they have these kind of warp pad things, although the magic cave ones don't warp you. You do see these warp pads in the Force Point temples as well. They don't seem to be exclusively warp pads. I don't want to imply that, but these little, I call them pedestals. I think pedestals is a good word for them. They're little pedestals, slightly raised. They have these really intricate designs. These are present in the magic caves. They are present again in Krazoa architecture. They're present in the Force Point temples, the shrines, the palace, but they're also in the magic caves. This is the only consistency, like I said. But if you look at the caves, you see that there's nothing really Krazoa-like. They don't have the Krazoa face. They don't have the typical Krazoa vibe. The magic caves do have a collection of these little pedestals. Some of them have these magic gems. These gems, they hold magic that you can use to power your staff. You know, the staff that you have that's theoretically not from Dinosaur Planet, because that makes sense. For what it's worth, I think the gems are found on Cerinia as well, but heavy speculation ahead. I theorize these magic caves were not built by the Kryzoa. I think the Cerinians built them. Remember when I told you to remember the Thorntail Hollow architecture and that door that the staff seemingly moves by itself? It took a while for me to realize this, but do we ever see any architecture like this at all across Dinosaur Planet? It's really decrepit compared to places like Cloudrunner Fortress and Walled City. It's also not really even that similar. I think so many people just assumed this was all Kryzoan, but it differs so greatly from what we know as Kryzoan architecture too. So who built it? It's entirely possible it was a dino tribe, maybe even one that doesn't exist anymore. It's also entirely possible that it simply was built by the Kryzoa. But let's go down the route that maybe it wasn't built by either a dinosaur or a Kryzoa. Since the warpstone resembles the same architecture, we can assume whoever it was who built the temple where you find the Queen Earthwalker and the well, they also probably built the warpstone. We know warpstones can't warp dinosaurs. The natural conclusion is that they were probably warping Kryzoa. But do we actually know that the Kryzoa needed a mechanism to warp them around the planet? We don't. Now, small caveat, there is one point against this theory, and that's the fact that the warpstone can warp you directly into Kryzoa Palace. But hear me out. That's not necessarily firm confirmation that it was built by the Kryzoa. I wouldn't say it is. It is definitely an implication that he was built by the Kryzoa, but for the purpose of this speculation, let's just go with the idea that he was not. So if it's not the Kryzoa, who are they warping? Why would there need to be a warpstone? Hear me out. What if all of this in Thorntail Hollow was built by Cerinians? And I understand this is insanely speculative territory, and we're just gonna indulge it for right now. Cerinians building this architecture would explain the connection from the door to the staff, which we don't really know how it works, but we could speculate maybe the connection caused the staff to move the door? It would also explain the giant well. Why would the dinosaurs need that? They could just drink from the stream that's nearby. I guess maybe the Kryzoa would need a well, but I mean, we don't really know. We don't really know how big the Kryzoa were as well, at least when they were in their prime, but I've seen a lot of speculation that they were a very tall race. It also doesn't really explain all of the convenient fox-sized things on Dinosaur Planet, or why there's a carnivorous plant called the fox trap that seems to only have a taste for foxes on a planet where there's otherwise no foxes. Now, there is one scene that potentially refutes this theory, but I'll tell you why I still preferred this theory over the alternative. In Moon Mountain Pass, the Kryzoa that gives Fox the quest to go collect the Kryzoa spirits does seem to also potentially will an identical door open. I don't really have an answer for this, except for maybe the staff wanted to help its previous wielder and it was the staff actually doing it. Fox does just hear Krystal being tortured in that scene, so it's possible the staff still did it. We really don't know. This is not an airtight theory, but it is speculation that I want to throw out here because I think it's interesting and I've never heard people in the fandom talk about this as a potential. So I'm putting it on the table as a potential. Boom. We finally have new discourse to talk about. That being said, I do feel like this speculation is a lot and I am definitely rambling. So let's dial this back in. Say Cerinia established a sort of presence here on Dinosaur Planet, at least for a time. They traveled the planet, maybe they even had a sort of outpost here. They even constructed these magic caves. The question is, why? And that's the thing, isn't it? We don't have enough information to go off of, but let's consider the alternative, and that's that the Kryzoa built them. So why would they build them? Right, there's no reason that they would build them. Okay. On a more serious note, that would imply the Kryzoa made the staff, which is a really cool idea until you realize that kind of falls apart when you consider that Krystal is new to Dinosaur Planet and has the Kryzoa explained to her in the game's prologue. Unless the staff was passed down between several people and somehow ended up in Krystal's hands on Cerinia and then ended up back on Dinosaur Planet when she went to Dinosaur Planet. I mean, I guess that could happen. It seems a little too complex. So, right, original theory. Back on track. Magic caves are Cerinian made, and the staff is Cerinian made. Why? Well, again, we don't really have enough information to even start to come up with a theory. Not one that has really any backing evidence to support it. But if I had to speculate, if I had to indulge upon just pure wild speculation, I would speculate maybe the Cerinians made these caves here for an emergency. What if these staves are common on Cerinia? What if they are? What if these staves, these things that are called weapons and tools by Krystal herself, are common? What if powering them up in places of power is not really a rarity? What if the Cerinians set all of this up on Dinosaur Planet in case something happened to their homeworld? What if they wanted any refugees from their homeworld to come to Dinosaur Planet, knowing it was close by and spoke the same language as they do? Maybe these magic staves are culturally significant. Maybe the Cerinians wanted assurance that an aspect of their world would live on, even if their homeworld perished. To fall even further into speculation territory, maybe they saw all of this coming. Krystal has telepathy. Is it so out of the question to suggest that someone in Cerinia could have seen the future? Maybe the caves were made because the future needed them to be here. Maybe somewhere in the past, the Cerinians saw their doom and understood what they had to do in order to protect the world from a very dark fate. It is a wild theory with no substance, but it's one that I personally lean on versus the caves just being made by the Kryzoa because, I mean, you could make the same argument that maybe the Kryzoa saw that they needed to be there, maybe they did make this stuff and it just somehow ended up in Krystal's hands. I feel like that explanation, while it does work, there's just a few things here and there that just don't add up enough to the point where I prefer the other theory. So, to recap, I think the gameplay mechanics of the staff, such as the Fire Blaster icon, are representations of where magic can be used in order to progress the game. These representations are shown to the player by the staff, which can speak to the earth. Krystal knows the dino language because that's really just the language of her people. That may even just be the language of that section of the Lilat system. Cerinia and Dinosaur Planet were probably close to each other, and the magic caves are left over from Cerinians being on Dinosaur Planet. I don't think that they are constructs of the Kryzoa. Do I honestly think this theory covers the intended lore by the devs? Given the nature of this game's development, no. In terms of leaks, there really has not been anything involving the StarFox Adventures version of Krystal. In fact, we know more about the Dinosaur Planet version than the iteration of her in the final product. Let that sink in for a bit. Consider this video less of trying to prove that this was some sort of hidden lore connection and more of trying to patch some of the strangeness with StarFox Adventures. The game went through so many different versions that it's no wonder it came out the way that it did, but I still like to try to make sense of what feels not explained enough. If I'm honest, I'm 99.9% sure I'm overthinking this entire thing, but theories like this are honestly just fun to speculate on, even when there's nothing to support them. Sometimes taking shots in the dark is just kind of fun. I think that's why people like mysteries so much. We like the unknown. We like it for its strangeness, but we like to solve it too, or at least try. It's kind of a puzzle for our brain after all. I would love for some more lore to come out about this game in its finished state. I love Dinosaur Planet, I really do. But I feel like we're at the point where all of that lore is already discovered, with little bits here and there coming out thanks to the ROM leaking a few years ago. I would like to know if there was any more to the Krystal we got. To Cerinia, to the magic caves, to the staff. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I can still dream. After all, people said for over a decade that Dinosaur Planet would never see the light of day. I'm actually convinced anything's possible now. This video definitely ended up being way longer than I thought it would be, but I'm curious. Did you come to any different conclusions for StarFox Adventures and these just really strange things about it? Honestly, I've been thinking about these theories of mine for years now, really. I've had so many people try to tell me that Adventures is nonsensical because of its development being so troubled. I really do think that 9 out of 10 cases you can make a lot of this game's mysteries and little unexplained plot bits work. You just need to think a little. And I'm not gonna say my speculation is canon, by the way. That's why it's speculation. The reality is I don't really know what the devs intended, but I do know what I think would be cool and what kind of makes sense. I think it makes sense, at least. More videos are on their way, but do tell me if my speculation inspired a new headcanon or theory out of you. I love hearing about that kind of stuff. Until next time, stay safe out there and do a barrel roll.